Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of A Closer Look, the show dedicated to bringing you the facts. We ask the questions no one else will, and we get the answers that no one else can. I'm Arabin Apia, and I'm coming to you tonight from the beautiful Bahama Resort. Thanks so much for joining us. So, let me tell you a story about a girl named Mary Jane. I don't know Mary Jane personally, but some of you do. Sometimes she goes by different names. She's been called a weed, a bud, and depending on who you ask, she's even been called the healing of the nation. For the sake of tonight's conversation, let's call her Cannabis. For a long time, she hasn't had the best reputation. In fact, for decades, cannabis has been painted with one brush, labeled as a dangerous drug, sparking countless debates and controversies. This perception didn't just affect government policy. It touched the very fabric of communities, not just here locally, but around the globe. As a matter of fact, thousands of young men and women from families like yours and mine were seduced by Mary Jane, and the results have been dire. For those who survived, it's meant criminal records that have kept many of them from reaching their true potential. But fast forward to the present, and the world is rethinking its stance on cannabis. And while many jurisdictions have opted to take the recreational route, others are opting for a little more caution, including the Bahamas. Here at home, the original idea was pretty simple. Decriminalize small amounts of cannabis to offer young men and women a second chance without a haunting criminal record. A chance to step into a brighter future unburdened by the weight of past mistakes. But as the years have rolled on, it's become clear that the landscape surrounding cannabis has shifted. Well, it hasn't shifted that much, at least not here at home. So far, the government has unveiled a compendium of 11 pieces of legislation that would regulate the use of cannabis for medicinal and religious purposes only. It's a decision that, at the heart of it, reflects a careful consideration of the values that the Bahamas is known for. But if you're like me, you want to know, no, you need to know what a regulated industry looks like. If you're like me, you need to know what precautions will be taken to address potential abuses. You need to know what conditions apply for medicinal use. You need to know that there won't be a mass abandoning of Christianity for Rastafarianism. So what does that mean for the future? Not just for the Bahamas, but for the world as a whole. Well, it's a question that's percolating in the minds of many, and tonight we're here to explore the answers. Stay tuned because A Closer Look begins right after this.
There recently was a bill that's been drafted and other regulations that have been put forth. People have had a chance to review, and this is an opportunity for them to question, but in a setting where you have a regional perspective. Other countries have approached it in different ways, and I think there are lessons to be learned as we approach collectively as a country how we'll manage this potential opportunity. For some, it's economic, some it's medicinal. For farmers, it's a crop. And so just looking forward to seeing all perspectives.
Welcome back. You're watching A Closer Look. I'm Arabina Apia, and our show tonight is coming to you from the beautiful Bahama Resort in Nassau, the Bahamas. Thanks so much for tuning in. Conversations surrounding cannabis are not just being held locally. It is, in fact, a regional and international conversation. That regional conversation took center stage recently at a meeting held at the Breezers Resort. ACL correspondent Catherine Duncrum was there and brings us all the details.
The government has unveiled several bills aimed at legalizing cannabis for medical and religious purposes and decriminalizing possession of small amounts.
The compendium of bills has major social and economic implications, and as expected is raising questions about the way forward. Tonight, the Ministry of Agriculture and Marine Resources launched the first of what is expected to be the first of many discussions on the issue. Let's take a closer look.
In recent years, there has been a growing global trend towards the liberalization of cannabis laws, driven by a shift in attitudes towards its medicinal and religious applications, as well as recognition of the potential economic benefits of a regulated cannabis industry. Minister of Agriculture and Marine Resources, the Honorable Jomo Campbell, emphasizes that while the discussion surrounding cannabis is controversial, it is an essential dialogue that cannot be overlooked.
As you can see from the turnout, I think it's extremely important. It's a hot topic. It's a household conversation, and so what we wanted to do was bring the conversation out from in the corners, in the small spaces, into a public forum where people can feel free to come and express themselves and ask the questions, and also potentially get answers and give us something to go back home to take a look at. So when we produce our documents for the public, we could actually be producing something that's inclusive of all of the views that are to be considered.
The forum held on October 12th featured a diverse panel of representatives from countries around the region, including the Honorable Sabato Caesar, Minister of Agriculture, Forestry, Fisheries, Rural Transformation, Industry and Labor from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Danae Ashpole, former CEO of the Cannabis Licensing Authority from Jamaica, and others who provided insights based on their experiences with cannabis regulation.
I thought it was extremely important to invite our colleagues from the region, persons right here from the Caribbean, just to show that we have our brothers and sisters nearby who have done it, who are doing it, who are improving on it. They're able to show us the challenges, show us some pathways that have already been forged, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel in certain instances, but we can also look to avoid some of the trade winds and headwinds that we may face. So we just want to try to get it as right as possible from the outset.
The event saw a significant turnout from the Rastafarian community, who have historically faced marginalization due to their use of cannabis as a sacred sacrament in their faith. Mr. Campbell emphasized that in discussions on contentious topics like this, where perspectives may diverge, the ministry is committed to upholding the respect and dignity of all individuals.
The government of the Bahamas is a government for all of the people. As you would know, today we had the state funeral for Minister Wilschcombe. Minister Wilschcombe was big on conversation. He was managing the issue of tackling violence against all genders. That required tons and tons of conversation. And so we wanted to do the very same thing as it relates to this hot topic issue. Everyone was allowed, and I can say that everyone is still allowed. Online, they can visit, they can leave their comments. You don't obviously have to agree with what's going on. Share those comments.
Reporting for a closer look, I'm Catherine Duncan.
Thank you so much, Catherine. When we return, we are joined by the Attorney General himself, who will walk us through the draft legislation and the government's potential implementation plan. Stay tuned. We're back after the break.
The agenda is progressive in terms of, diversifying some areas of our economy. And I do think that, once the process is fair and equitable to all of the stakeholders along the cannabis production chain, I believe that it has some ability to bring influence or bring effect for people who use it.
Welcome back. I'm Aravana Apia, and you're watching A Closer Look. Thank you so much for joining us. We're coming to you live from the beautiful Bahama Resort here in Nassau, Bahamas. Joining me now is someone who is uniquely positioned to answer many of the questions that are floating around in the public and maybe shed some light on the way forward for the Davis administration as well. Please welcome to the show Attorney General Ryan Binder. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
So, Minister, cannabis is a huge conversation right now. The government has a compendium of bills that are currently in the draft state, and we're seeking feedback. Tell me what your ideal timeline for this legislation looks like.
Well, we've worked hard over the last 2 years to get the compendium of bills in the form it is right now to address as many components of the regulation of the cannabis industry, especially as it pertains to matters such as medicinal use, research base, and for religious use. And we now have a compendium of 10 bills with subsidiary legislation ready to go. We have published that on cannabisbahamas.gov.bs for the wider public to be able to have an opportunity to review it. We've also published for the first time the Bahamas Marijuana Commission's report that was put together under the former administration, but they had never published the report. So we went ahead and published that report, as well as a CARICOM report that was done to give a comprehensive approach and as much information as we had with respect to what we were trying to do with the regulation of medicinal cannabis. Our ideal timeline would certainly look to concluding public consultations over the next 4 to 6 weeks. And then taking into consideration all of the comments received, we've already started some closed consultations, which we call the first stage of the consultation efforts. We met with probably some 20 different organizations privately to get their feedback. And then the public has an opportunity to review and to provide written feedback as well, which we'll take all of that into account. Ideally, we would like to have the compendium agreed and tabled in Parliament by the end of this calendar year. And we would hopefully look to debate it either the end of this calendar year or in the first quarter of 2024. That's important because as part of the regime, we look to establish a regulatory authority, the Cannabis Authority, which would be responsible for licensing, for evaluating applicants, for monitoring ongoing operations, just like a typical regulator would.
Right.
And in that context, we have to develop the expertise, develop some infrastructure and know-how, and constitute that authority. And we would look to try to be able to do that the first half of 2024 to be in a position to launch the authority and the whole licensing procedures and evaluation by the new fiscal year, which would be July 2024.
That is a very aggressive agenda. I think a lot of people may say, "Oh, that's really fast." Can we talk about, the level of education and the awareness campaign that I'm sure the government is preparing to undertake as they try to get Bahamians, aware and comfortable with the idea and what it means moving forward?
Sure, absolutely. We, like I said, conducted a first stage of consultations, primarily with religious groups, the medical community, the political directorate, and the business community, and those constituents that would be impacted with respect to the regulations. We look to go again to the wider public to continue education campaign. And the education doesn't stop just with preliminary consultations of the bills. In fact, it's a mandate to continue the public awareness even while the bills are in Parliament, being debated and even passed. The awareness is important. And then after the authority and the regime is established, in law, the authority is mandated to continue public education even after the process is in place.
All of the conversations locally really began with a push to decriminalize small amounts of marijuana so that young people are not being held back by having that strike on their record. Can you talk about the evolution of this conversation? Because I think that is very much still a goal for the government. Can we talk about that? How many people have been impacted by the move to decriminalize small amounts?
Well, the impact is thousands of Bahamians being either judged or not giving an opportunity for employment or to further their career and further their opportunities. Going back, it's thousands. Even those who just have it on their record have an impact. So what we're looking to do with this regime is we're looking to decriminalize small amounts of marijuana.
And what qualifies as a small amount?
So the threshold is 30 grams, which is about 1 ounce. So if your record indicates you've had less than 1 ounce, then that would be decriminalized and expunged going backwards. So the decriminalization certainly is going forward, and then we look to expunge records going backwards, so everybody is on the same playing field with respect to small amounts of marijuana.
Even though this is only currently being considered for medicinal and religious and research purposes, where does the government see the economic potential for the regulation of this industry?
Sure. So there are a variety of different licenses that'll be issued, and many of those licenses have direct economic impact. Of course, the Davis administration has been champion agribusiness opportunities and Bahamians getting involved in agriculture. And certainly the cultivation license is one of those opportunities to enhance agribusiness. Right. And it's of note that to hold a cultivation license in the Bahamas, it has to be 100% Bahamian owned. So this is an opportunity for Bahamians at large to get into agribusiness and farming to support the grander regime that's in place. And we'll have a number of different cultivation licenses. We have the opportunity for Bahamians to get involved at a small level with our micro cultivation farms. Then we have the medium-sized farm and the larger-sized farm, all based upon the size of the farm you look to cultivate. It's of note that the Ministry of Agriculture has agreed to set aside certain acreage of agricultural land in Nassau at the outset to help with the micro farmers, the small farmers who want to get into the business. And so that'll be a great impact for the agribusiness. But that's not the only area where there's economic opportunity. Certainly there are production facilities that will have to produce the medicinal cannabis, and those will be available for participation and have a separate license. There's also retail opportunities, whether that be at the dispensary level or again in the nursery cultivation level. And dispensing is also going to be reserved 100% for Bahamians. Okay. And there'll be a number of different avenues for participation. Certainly, all pharmacies, for example, will be able to dispense medicinal cannabis because it's a medicinal product by prescription. But also we're providing retail dispensaries as well as therapeutic facilities to be licensed. Think about all of, for example, the tourists who may come in who require medicinal cannabis for their particular ailments. Right. And they come to the Bahamas and don't have access to buy that medicinal product for them. They now will have access to buy the medicinal product on prescription basis that they would otherwise be able to get at home. That is also an economic opportunity because only a Bahamian-owned facility can dispense the cannabis.
Minister, what you're talking about sounds like it opens the door for some abuse, and I would like in the next segment for us to touch on that, how the government is going to move into ensuring that we don't have situations of abuse. So stay tuned, stay with us. We have more conversation with the Attorney General, Ryan Pinder, in just a moment.
The only positive thing I see from the legislation is that they're tabling a legislation. So it actually now starts the conversation. But we must also be a part to make sure that the conversation is a fair conversation and not a one-sided conversation.
The government has invited the Rastafari here. The government has invited everyone to the conversation. That's a positive thing. Now, when it comes to dealing with the Rastafari with cannabis, I feel the government should deal with the Rastafari and listen to the Rastafari because we know what we need when it comes to cannabis.
Welcome back. You're watching A Closer Look, coming to you live from the beautiful Bahama Resort. I'm Arabina Apia, Thanks so much for tuning in. You're joining this conversation with Attorney General Ryan Pinder, and we're having a very interesting conversation on cannabis and the government's implementation plan, their draft legislation, and the compendium of bills. Minister, you've been talking about the economic benefits and some of the entrepreneurial opportunities that can present themselves for Bahamians at every level in this process. But I want to talk to you about abuses, because there is a concern, and rightfully so, about whether or not persons may find themselves abusing this and using the healthcare system to do so. What sort of steps are being taken by the government to ensure that we don't have that sort of situation happening?
Sure. Well, I want to be clear. This is a regulated medical cannabis treatment regime. So every licensee is going to be required to comply. But what we're looking to do to ensure that there's, as you say, no fraud and abuse of the system, by legislation, this is going to be a pure electronic regime. Which what that means is that you won't be able to go, for instance, to a doctor and get a handwritten prescription to go and fill for your medicinal cannabis.
Right.
One, you have to have an ailment that is prescribed. And so we have, and you can see the ailments on the website,
Okay.
but we have some 19 ailments that at this time, based in science, are ailments that is recognized that medicinal cannabis can assist with. You have to go to the doctor and get prescribed medical cannabis. And the level of THC in the medical cannabis varies by the types of ailment.
Right.
If you have a severe acute pain brought on by cancer, for example, your treatment level may be a lot higher than if you have say anxiety or insomnia or some other prescribed ailment. And so you will only be able to acquire the medicinal cannabis in the dosage, just like a regular prescription medication that is applicable for your ailment. The doctor would have to transmit that prescription electronically through the authority, so it's always verified through the authority. And then you would be able to fill that prescription at any licensed pharmacy or retail establishment. And that could only be filled electronically as well. So they would have to see the prescription in the electronic database. So we're trying to keep all of the proper controls around the actual prescription and filling the prescription and type of ailments that you're getting medicinal cannabis for.
Okay, but what about cases where you may have like unauthorized cultivation, for example? You know, cannabis is still deemed an illegal substance for the most part, and so you know, how do we manage that aspect of it?
So again, everything has to be licensed. So if you're a cultivator for medicinal cannabis purposes, you have to be licensed by the authority. Nothing has changed with respect to the illegality of marijuana outside of this medical regime. So if you are growing marijuana and you don't have a license to do so, whether it be for medical purposes or religious purposes, you're in violation of the law. Those laws have not changed. If you are transporting marijuana without a transportation license that's issued, you are again illegally transporting a banned substance. And so none of those laws have changed at all.
Right. So let's talk, I think as we wrap up, about the religious aspect. The Rastafarian community has long been advocating for the use of cannabis as a part of their worship and their sacrament. You know, is there a concern that we may have a mass exodus of people just say they're now Rastafarians in order to partake? And you know, what have the conversations with the Rastafarian community be like so far?
So in our consultations, they were the first group we met with. We know how important religious use as a sacrament is to them and to that community. And so they were the first group we met with. We have put forward a framework based upon international benchmarking and best practices for their comment. And again, if you are distributing it for religious use, you have to be licensed. The Rastafarian faith has to give a list of members to the authority on who are officially recognized as members of the religion.
Right. If I may interject,
yeah.
though, is that a reasonable ask? Is that something that you think we can keep track of?
Sure, absolutely. Because remember, this is going to be a modern digital technology, and the Rastafarian community is fine with this. And in fact, they offered that they could issue membership cards to their membership, so it's easier to track on day-to-day life, on who's a member and who's not a member. And they have to abide because, again, they're licensed activities. And so we're working closely with the Rastafarian community in order to present a framework that is balanced, both in terms of what is expected by the religious faith, but also with the necessary controls and regulation on the government side that will give the faith and confidence that it is being administered appropriately.
Well, Minister, I want to thank you so much for being here and for having this conversation. I think there's so much more that we can delve into, and I think we may actually have to have you back.
Sure.
As the consultations continue, as people continue to give their feedback. But I want to thank you so much for being here and participating.
Sure, and I want to encourage the Bahamian public to log onto the website, www.cannabisbahamas.gov.bs. The whole compendium is there. The Marijuana Commission report is there. The CARICOM report is there. And there's even a section in the website where you can write and provide your comments, your suggestions, your concerns. And those emails come directly to me. And I read every single one of them. I save them all. Because ultimately we have to look at those to compile the final product and take into consideration the opinions of the Bahamian public.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
There's more of a closer look right after this, so stay tuned.
It's not only about from the usage on a medicinal level or the changes in decriminalizing certain areas of small dosages if you have them on you. So I think those things are important, and then just like I said, the inclusion. So now we're looking at, from an agricultural standpoint, not just cultivation and farming, but the byproducts that also come from the plant.
Whether you're for or against the use and regulation of cannabis, one thing is clear. You must be part of the conversation. We cannot allow shifting tides to dictate our way forward. We cannot allow ourselves to be left out of the conversation, or worse, left behind. The future of cannabis, the Bahamas, and the world is still unfolding. But by engaging in dialogue, we, the people, have the power to shape the narrative and influence the course that we all take. It's a chance to voice your concerns, express your hopes, and be an active participant. Because your voice matters. Your perspective counts. And together, we can navigate these uncharted waters, building a future that reflects our collective aspiration and values. I encourage all of you to join the conversation by visiting the website at www.cannabisbahamas.gov.bs and read the draft legislation. Offer your feedback, share your concerns, and help shape the outcomes. Till next time, Bahamas, I'm Arabina Apia. Good night, everyone.